All right, we are live right now. I'm just going to give it 30 seconds for participants or attendees to join in, and then we'll go ahead and start. All right, seems like we have almost everyone joined in. Thank you all for coming to this webinar, and welcome to our second session of the free MEA free winter webinars series. Today's webinar is on York Region's Inflow and Infiltration Reduction Program for New Development, and sponsored by York Region and Accardi Schaeffers. So an outline today, we'll do a bit introductions and housekeeping, and then we'll go through the presentations, and we'll take questions and answers for the presentations, and then we'll move on to panel discussion, and then we'll take questions from you to the panelists. And for any assistance, or if you're having any technical difficulties, just message me in the chat here on Zoom or email me. So even though we're gonna answer or address the questions at the end of the presentations and during the panel discussion, feel free to type in your questions at any time using the Q&A function, which appears at the banner at the bottom of your screen, or during the time when we're answering question. If you're feeling more comfortable in asking your question verbally, you can raise your hand and I will let you speak up. All right, so today's presenters, the first one we have is Raneen Nasir. Raneen is a project manager of the Inflow and Infiltration Reduction Program in the Environmental Services Department at York Region. She has over 15 years of experience in data analysis and project management in both public and private sector. Raneen has been a lead and an integral part of York Region's Inflow and Infiltration Reduction strategy, both in development and implementation. Raneen is the professional engineer licensed with the Professional Engineers of Ontario, and she has a master's degree in engineering from University of Toronto. Our second speaker today, or our second presenter, is Joe Accardi. Joe is a professional engineer with over 20 years of industry experience in the civil engineering field. He is currently the president of Accardi Schaeffers Consulting. Through his career, Joe has spent over 10 years as the National Specification and Engineering Manager at Royal Pipe and Fittings. He served as the Executive Director of both Ontario Sewer and Water Main Construction Association and the Great Toronto Sewer and Water Main Construction Association. Over the years, Joe has spent time on many industry boards, from ORCGA, One Call Board, to OPS Advisory Board. So before I hand it over to Raneen to start the first presentation, I would like to take some time to get to know the audience. So you see a poll in front of you. Please go in and select the answers. This will give us enough information on who's attending, what type of professionals are attending, municipal, consulting, suppliers, and all of that. So I'll just give it half a minute or so to allow for everyone to pick their answers, and we'll share the result. And I guess it'll give us a feel of the audience when we're doing the panel discussion and presenting as well. right.
I get to go, Amin, or you want to give some more?
I'll share the results. So basically, you can see most of the audience, 70% is municipal folks, 19 is consulting. We have a few contractors and quite a few suppliers as well. Most of them are engineers. We have a third of the audience is technologists. We have 1% students, which is good. And they're joining us from all around Ontario, north, east, west, and outside of Canada as well. So this is good feedback. All right, we're all set. And Raneen, you can go ahead and share your presentation and start when you're ready.
Sure, thank you, Amin. Give me a few seconds to share here. Okay, is it on? Just want to make sure. Thanks, Amin, and everyone for joining this webinar. We're excited today to present to you our I&I reduction program in new development. And I will go right in as we have a full agenda to present to you today. I will start with giving you a quick background about the region, our mandated I&I reduction program, and how this project came about. I will then show you some results from our flow monitoring data with a focus on new development. We'll touch then on the collaborative efforts and the stakeholder engagement and our plan right from the beginning. From there, I will pass it on to Joe Accardi from Accardi Schaefers, who will present the outcome of the review and surveys that we did with the region's 9 local municipalities and what the key I&I contributors that we identified through that survey and review that we've done. I will then expand on the best management practices and highlights of the new standards developed to address these contributors. So quickly, like I said, just give a quick overview of the region. For some of you who may not be familiar with the GTA much or with York Region is located in southern Ontario, surrounded by Lake Simcoe from the north, City of Toronto from the south, Peel region from the west, and Durham region from the east. So you could imagine the amount of collaboration that we do need to do as a wastewater servicing within the region, since we are multi-jurisdictional, which requires a high level of collaboration between the neighboring regional municipalities and its 9 local municipal partners to manage its wastewater services. Regional Council guides our strategic vision of both the municipal and regional government who support each other in our work. And it's no exception for the I&I reduction program. On top of that, I just want to bring it to your attention that following a province's approval for the condition of the Southeast Collector IEA that was held back in 2010, York Region began collaborating with its 9 local municipalities to develop an I&I reduction strategy and an implementation program to meet these conditions that were put forward by the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, or the Ministry of Environment back then. A water and wastewater steering committee consisting of representatives from each local municipality as well as the region was also formed in order to guide the development of the strategy. As we needed to collaboratively come up with a long-term program for the I&I reduction. The I&I program, since day one and since we developed a strategy, was consisting of 8 program areas that we continue to deliver on since 2011. And since that first submission, we were aiming to reduce peak wastewater flows at Dufferin Creek by 10%. Which if you would translate it to I&I volumes, it's about 75 million liters per day. That was efforts to combine between water conservation and I&I, with our target from I&I to the year 2031 was 40 MLD. The main focus in the last 10 years has been on developing a solid monitoring and analysis program, which it included also obviously investigation and rehabilitation programs and projects in both the public and private side and in both regional and local wastewater systems. To date, the region has reduced close to 55% of our 40 MLD 2031 reduction target. So we do have still some work to do. However, that I want to mention that this has all been through that collaboration with, as you can see, with the percentages that are shown on the screen, between regional, local, municipal, and public-private partnership efforts. So addressing I&I new system has also been closely investigated by the region since inception of the strategy, and first through its development of the I&I inspection, testing, and acceptance guideline that we released back in 2011. And now through the development of this project, we are looking at a more robust I&I standards that we're revisiting that part of the program. Like I said, in 2011, we did work on developing this long-term I&I reduction strategy in order to meet the province's conditions that were put forward by the province. And it was unique to the region, maybe at the time. I'm not sure if anyone else would have as another condition such as the regions. This strategy was updated in 2016 because we are required again by the conditions from the ministry to update the strategy every 5 years. And since then, we are now working our second 5-year update for submission later this year. The region's I&I testing and acceptance guideline that is posted on our website is what I mentioned before, is to outline general procedures and minimum requirements that we put forward for inspection, testing, and acceptance of new sanitary sewers in the public right of way. As part of the condition, we're also required to submit annual reporting to the ministry on our progress, both the regions and the local municipal progress in I&I reduction. And last year was our 9th annual report that we submitted and also posted on our website. In addition to its collaboration with the local municipalities, York has been successful in implementing public-private partnership initiatives, which we call P3 initiative, through two main programs, which are developer-funded agreements to reduce I&I in existing sewers, which we call them as a tri-party agreements as well, and our servicing incentive program for new development, which you might hear us say the SIP program. These have been extremely successful as well, in addition to our efforts with the local municipalities and the region on our programs. In 2017, we did initiate this work to expand our understanding and to expand on I&I, not only in existing systems, but also in new development, which Joe will expand on in his presentation once I pass it on to him. In 2019, as well, as part of that work, we drafted a white paper to present York Region's perspective on I&I and new development that we could circulate if you'd like. And I will be presenting some of the data that we had expanded on in this particular white paper. Reductions achieved to date that I explained or presented before did go through a lot of collaboration efforts between the region, local municipalities, and the development industry. So when we asked ourselves why do we need to address I&I new development, as you probably questioning or know that most of I&I is coming from the existing system. However, as you can see from the map, with the majority of York Region's collection system is in the young to middle spectrum, we did define a young as being less than 20 years old, given that a life cycle of a sewer is 100 years. And when we did that analysis, we did see that in addition to the fact that region is a growing municipality, as it's going to continue to grow at least until 2051, I&I in new development has been a key. And as you can see, only 50% of the wastewater collection within the region has an age of more than 40 years old, with over 85% that are half-life of the expected lifespan of a sanitary sewer. Hence the need to be proactive about addressing I&I also in new development. So through the flow monitoring that we also have at the region, as some of you might know, we do have meters that are installed throughout the region system. We have over 350 monitoring locations along the region since 2013. And using that data, we wanted to take a closer look of what's happening possibly in those new development area. So what data showed us when we look at all those basins, or 350 basins that we have within the region, and aside from the correlation that you see between pipe age and I&I, which I would assume is not surprising to many, where we were seeing increasing trends in I&I with pipe age. For this particular exercise, however, we did want to focus on and zoom in on, well, what is happening with those young medium age systems that are 20 and 40 years old, and see how well they compare to the design allowances. So when we compared the figure, which plots the peak hour rainfall derived I&I against average sewer pipe age, it shows several monitoring basins in the young to middle age categories that are exceeding the typical RDII allowances for Ontario, let's say, which range between 0.1 to 0.26 liter per second per hectare. So more specifically, approximately 24% of the average pipe age with less than 20-year-old are exceeding the design inflow and infiltration allowance of 0.26 liter per second per hectare, and almost 94% are exceeding the tighter inflow and infiltration allowance of 0.1 liter per second per hectare. And when we include the pipes that are also 40 years old, that you also do not expect I&I to reach at its peak, we could be looking at a 41% that are above that 0.26 liter per second per hectare. Another measure that we look at normally when we analyze our I&I data, and we do that in-house, is looking at the groundwater infiltration or base infiltration separately from what I just presented, which was the peak RDII, which was the rainfall derived I&I. You're probably wondering why I'm showing this graph, because it's not showing any obvious correlation between pipe age and groundwater. However, what I want to show here, and what we wanted to show here, is the deficit that groundwater does not differentiate between old and new pipe, but rather maybe materials, workmanship, and inspection that are likely will make the difference. So we were able to see that groundwater infiltration in a 10-year-old subdivision is probably as bad as a 50 or 60-year-old pipes. And when we looked at the correlation between dry weather flow and groundwater in a study that we did with our water resource team, you actually could see a direct correlation between, when you're showing the flows that do increase as entrenched groundwater increases, the levels are increasing. So something we definitely considered when developing the standard, and which Joe will expand on, that we worked with the industry and material suppliers, that having materials based on constructability alone may not be enough to prevent I&I in new sewers. Other forms of data we look at is obviously through CCTV and sometimes even during construction. So I'm showing here some pipes that are 13 years old that are obviously showing a lot of I&I. And things that we needed to do on site after 100% design was completed, wrapping manholes because water level came up right after dewatering finished. It's something that probably was not considered, and it would be worthwhile including in a standard when you're developing a new standard.
Sorry to interrupt. It seems that your sound is cutting off a bit. Can you try to turn off your video feed so that it doesn't consume your bandwidth, and maybe the audio quality will improve? Thank you.
Sure. Just 1 second. Because I'm in a present mode, it's kind of hard to. Let me stop sharing for a second.
Yeah, you can stop sharing, and if you hover the mouse at the bottom of the screen, you'll be able to see the stop video. All right.
Okay, so stop that. I'll share again. Sorry about that.
No worries. Thank you.
Is it better now? Do you hear me better?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, thanks, Amin.
Thanks.
So just where I stopped again, for developing a program or a project of this scale, we also had to see what is our mission for this project. What is our ultimate goal? And we found that this statement that we developed right from the get-go of the project is something that we looked at, and we in the beginning, but we continue to keep reminding ourselves every time we try to fix something or do something with the project, that we kept having that statement right from the beginning and until now, that we keep using it, which is to engage with local municipalities and industry to establish a region-wide industry-accepted inflow and infiltration standard and specifications for design, construction, inspection, and testing, and acceptance procedures for sanitary sewers in both the private and public right-of-way that is also consistent, achievable, and deliverable throughout the region. What I want to show in this slide is definitely where we got is not one hand won't clap by itself. And through this project, York has leveraged industry expertise and successes to set performance-based standards and develop best practices standards. And that obviously wasn't possible also without looking at the different aspects of the program. So when you want to develop a design standards, we asked ourselves, should we be also looking at subdivision agreements? What do we currently have? What's in the site plans? But also what's in other design, testing, and inspection practices, and what are existing provincial design standards and Ontario Building Code, and how are we going to capture all that? So we did consider all these aspects when developing this standard. We typically keep this type of slide to the end for acknowledgement. However, I did want to have it here to thank everyone who took part in this as an equal partner and has been instrumental to the success of this project. Obviously, we cannot deny that there were some challenges that we needed to overcome, and we're probably gonna get a few more along the way, just when we start implementing and putting things in the field. But which project doesn't have that? I guess our determination to come up with the best solution that works for all was our goal. We needed to start with a plan, that was for sure. So to take a project of this scale, we had to implement it in a phased approach. So we first looked at, okay, what do we currently have? What are each of the local area municipality has? What's in their designs, construction, testing, and inspection standards for each and every one of the 9 local municipalities. And then we took it to the next phase, which was doing a survey with the staff from the local municipalities from the different departments, and to understand what are the common practices that are used on new developments. What are the and then from there we then went to the site and did a construction site surveys that helped us review some gaps or inconsistencies between what we saw in the literature review and the surveys, and compare those to how are things implemented in the field, and what are the constructability, feasibility that are available in order for us to potentially develop a best practice. Phase 4 was to develop an I&I report that identified the most I&I contributors. Obviously, when we did our review, we saw a whole list of elements that could be contributing to I&I, but we did need to focus on what are the main contributors that are actually going to be long-term and that will we can help fix. Phase 5 is what we're presenting today, and where Joe will expand on what have we developed in terms of industry accepted standards and specifications for addressing key design, construction, inspection, and testing criteria that are aiming at reducing I&I new development and for adoption by the region and the local municipalities, and that are easy to be implementable. I guess from here, I'm just going to pass it to Joe. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Reneen. Let me just get my slide deck up here. I mean, for some reason, it doesn't ask me to. Oh, there it is.
You got it? Okay.
I got it. Let me just move this out of the way here. All right. Does everyone see the presentation now?
Yes.
All right, perfect. All right, thank you, everyone. So thanks, everyone, for coming. I see we have quite a few attendants here, a lot of people in attendance here. So thanks for this. I know it's a bit of an interesting topic. It's been, I&I has been at the forefront for a little while now. So before I do my presentation, I just want to thank everyone that's involved here. Just to give you a little bit of feedback on top of what Reneen was saying, is that this project's been an 18 to 24 month process. Through that, we've engaged 5 to 6 different working groups, every working group consisting of 20 plus people. So all in all, we've worked with all 9 local municipalities, pretty well all the industry partners, from the sewer and water main contractors and developers to the concrete and drain contractors that install the pipe on the private side, the Association of Consulting Engineers of Ontario, OCPA, the PVC pipe manufacturers. And it was a collaborative effort that involved, I'm going to say, well over 100 different industry specialists as we walked through and formulated a way to get this program going. So as Reneen spoke, once we looked at some of the data, we had to quantify key I&I contributors. So what we did is we had a strategic planning session where we looked at what are different ways to evaluate or look at typical I&I that is coming through into our industry and to the in new development. So what we did first of all is we looked at the private right of way of stuff. We looked at what's going on in new developments on the private side that are consistent drivers of I&I. So we looked at areas that had specific gaps in design and construction standards that are helping this or are causing I&I. So we looked at obviously laterals and the lateral connections at the main line has been a pressing issue for quite a few years in this industry. The actual connection to the maintenance holes over the last 5 or 6 years, there's a lot of advancement in the way the boots are designed and the way their boots are used for, say, PVC pipe, but how do we work that or transition that into, say, concrete type pipe? The actual maintenance hole itself, we looked at multiple different things that happen in the maintenance hole, from the joints themselves to the monolithic bases that are becoming a standard in the industry today, to how do we deal with the word modulock. The word modulock's been a little bit of an interesting word these days, and adjustment rings, what we're finding as we look at CCTV videos of sanitary sewers that are in the young range. We're seeing a lot of I&I generated through these modulocks or adjustment rings that are not sufficiently waterproofed. And we looked at mainline sewers themselves. How can our mainline sewers contributing? We found that they are. We looked at cross connections. This is originally in our strategic planning session. We thought, well, cross connections are definitely still happening, but as we did more and more research, we noticed that certainly wasn't the case anymore, or very minor. And then the last thing we looked at is construction dewatering and discharge into the sanitary sewer and new developments. So this one is we tried to break it into systemic and non-systemic. So this one, as much as it's an issue during the new development, it doesn't persist for long periods of time. It's just there to help with constructability and construction. And typically once the dewatering is stopped, we're not seeing that I&I anymore. So then we move to the private side. We looked at things that are happening on the private side. So we looked at cross connections in the right of way. So we look through different standards to see in the private right of way to see what's going on. We're noticing that a lot of, we'll get into a little bit more, but mostly everyone's color coding their pipe now. There's a little bit of, there's a little bit more separation now. So we're getting less and less of the cross connections. But then we looked at the lateral connections to how the lateral's connected after it's terminated by, say, the sewer and water main contractor. How does that connection continue on into the house? That's definitely a source of I&I. We looked at cleanouts and test fittings, test tees, still persistently being used in the marketplace. Do they still have a spot? Are we noticing a lot of I&I in there? And then more of two general ones is that we're noticing that we need to deal with contributors from site plans and infill developments that sometimes fall in a gray area where they deal with building code issues and non-building code issues. And we got to deal with how do we get to the next level when we're dealing with the gray matter, where we're dealing with development engineering for the municipalities, but there's still OBC technical issues that need to be resolved. And then same as the last one, construction, non-systemic construction dewatering. So from our strategic management plan, our strategic planning session, we looked at what are the best management practices for new development. So I'm not going to go through them all. I'm just going to go through a little bit of the theory of where we came up with some of these and how we developed. And you'll see more of them as we come into the standard. But more where we want to look at is how we can use some best management practices or things that work out there and use some sound engineering to develop best practices that can turn into a standard. Well, the key thing, the first thing we thought about is we talked to the industry, and the industry kept telling us that we need to have sound engineering. So we looked at associating sound engineering with great ideas and not having a system that has all the best bells and whistles and all the most expensive parts, and looking at what can really work and what works in our budget, but what's going to give long-term maintenance relief to municipalities. Because at the end of the day, when the developer's gone and the DC revenue's gone, this turns into a maintenance nightmare for the municipality. So just because the developer is willing to pay a little bit more to put in a product that we seem is going to work, at the end of the day, 20 years down the road, it's obligation of the municipality to continually maintain that. So we need to be cognizant of that and understanding of that as we move through it. So first meeting we had with the development community, I brought up this little car situation. I just wanted to bring it up a little bit to you guys again, but the concept is just simply that, is that if someone's buying you a car, it's very easily to say, oh, I'll take the Bentley, please. But the problem is the Bentley has a lot of maintenance costs. Changing the oil is very expensive on this car, and you're going to have to do that in years to come. So we need to look at, is that the right solution, or can we look at something a little more sleek, like maybe this little Mustang here might be a little bit more sleek, but it has a lower maintenance cost. It costs less to operate. And 20 years from now, we're not back at council looking for additional fundings to maintain something that we probably really didn't need in the first place. And to go on to Reneen's point, and I think this is what really stuck with the development group, is that we need to understand where the definition of young sewer comes from. And the car analogy is probably a good one for this one. It's at the municipality, it's like you're buying a new car. So you buy a new car. The concept behind you buying a new car is that you expect in the first 5 or 4 years of owning that vehicle, the only maintenance you're going to do is some tires, maybe some brakes, but very little maintenance. You're not expecting to overhaul the transmission or rebuild the engine. So what we're struggling with at the region is that when we look at some of the data and what Reneen presented, what the data is showing to us is that 5 years in, we're overhauling transmissions, we're changing engines, we're doing jobs that shouldn't be done for another 5 or 10 years. So how do we deal with that? How do we move forward and make sure that developments right now that we're focusing on have the right means and methods so that 5 or 10 years from now, they don't continue to pose problems with us and increase maintenance costs. So what for the best management practices, as I'll get into the standard as we go, I just want to pose some of the questions we asked ourselves as we're sitting in a real group. So we sat there and we talked to ourselves and we asked ourselves, are there actual standards in the marketplace right now that we can use in new development that always consider the impact of I&I? So are there? Do we need to do anything? So obviously the answer is we need to really address some groundwater flows that are very persistent in new developments on certain sites. So that's where this discussion came into, that we looked at the graph that Renine presented before about groundwater effect on I&I, and we noticed that regardless of the age of the system, groundwater affects and impacts I&I instantaneously in the sewer. So how do we deal with things like that? Then we talked about, we broke it into installation stuff. Is there any techniques that can be used in the field, construction techniques that can effectively help us to reduce I&I? Testing and inspection. So what we did too is we looked at all the local municipalities in the region, and we looked at what type of testing and inspection is being done on new developments, and we looked at ways that we could deal with enhancing the testing standards. We looked at what's being done on capital works type projects versus what's being done on development projects, and why is there sometimes a differing of opinions on how these projects are being inspected and testing. And then finally, the last part we talked about is how do we deal with final acceptance? So how do we ensure that whatever final inspections and tests were done, we get the proper information that's somehow related to final acceptance? And how do we deal with flow monitoring thresholds and new developments to ensure that the program is being successful and moving forward? So those became part of how we move forward with the best management practices. Then on the private right-of-way, which tends to be a bit of a gray area, but as we look at data, raw data at the region, we are noticing that there still is a substantial amount of both RDII and groundwater infiltration that's coming in on the private side. So how do we deal with that? So we looked at some design stuff. We looked at themes on things in the OBC that we can work with. Are the detailed drawings coming from the consultants working for the developers detailed enough to provide guidance on where the lateral connection is going to be and how that's going to be worked? Do lateral connection details need to be tested? How do we test them? And is the test T that we're working on right now, or that we've been using in the marketplace for 20 plus years, is it still effective? Are there technologies in the marketplace today, like CCTV testing, that can outdate what we're typically doing in the past to see where the property line is? Then we looked about installation. We looked at really going out in the field and looking at what's happening in the field. We're looking at the giving more room for the concrete and drain people. So we're looking at, can we move laterals? Can the sewer and water main contractors install the laterals, we'll say 1.5 meters beyond the property line, so it gives more access to the concrete and drain people, makes it less effective, or less, is it going to be less effective or more effective? How do we reduce the closeness that's going to happen to all the utilities? Typically in new developments, the sewer and water main goes in, then by the time they build the houses, there's a series of utilities that get installed. So how do we keep a little bit of separation and make it easier for them to work in there? Maybe that can help reduce some of the joint and failures that we're having. Then testing inspection, obviously OBC requirements are stringent for some testing, but how much of it's being done? How do we deal with it? Is it sufficient to be used for I&I? Should we look at air pressure testing that's already prescribed in the OBC? But how do we do that? It doesn't really give a test methodology. Just in 735, I believe the standard is, it does say that air pressure testing should be 35 kPa for 15 minutes. But how do we deal with that? How do we set that up? And then finally, for final acceptance on the private side, how do we work within the current OBC framework to ensure that some additional testing requirements are performed, so we can be secure or certain that any I&I we're receiving on the private side is being dealt with. So a little bit of the highlights of our standard. So we broke our standard into basically 4 sections. We broke it into areas that deal with design and construction related standards for all public and private right of way. Then we dealt with inspection related standards. So, and requirements, things in the inspection requirements or new manuals that we need to do to deliver better inspections or more effective inspections. Testing related standards. So when we went through the local municipality standards, we noticed there's a bit of inconsistencies with when tests are being performed, how they're being performed. So we want to streamline and standardize the testing. So that'll be discussed in that section. And then finally, flow monitoring related standards, how we deal with flow monitoring, how we deal with data we collect during flow monitoring, and what that data is going to tell us on whether or not our system is actually effective in reducing I&I. So we looked at some different things. We looked at pipe materials and joints. So we got a lot of involvement from the PVC pipe manufacturers and Enrico at the OCPA. We looked at, you'll see this flow chart is a bit of a snapshot. So like a 4-page flow chart in the standard, but I just wanted to give you a snapshot. So when you look at OPS and different standards, OPS tends to look at depth of bury and how deep the pipe's going to be, and they look at a lot of structural conditions. Well, what we're finding is a lot of municipalities typically change the side diameter based on the diameter of pipe. They change materials. So 450 and above, they'll change to concrete. There's no rhyme or reason. So we did some investigation. We tried to figure out that typically, are there more depths, issues with depths there? Are the depths working? Are the concrete pipes actually providing resistance to any groundwater issues? So what we did is we developed this table or flow chart that could be used by the developer's consultant, that they walk through the results of their hydrogeological assessment of the site and help them to understand what type of pipe materials can be used. Now, I know some of the other regions or areas around the province are looking, going straight to, okay, well, if you have groundwater, we go straight to CPP, concrete pressure pipe. It's a great idea, but we're trying to skin the cat a little bit differently here. We're trying to let's look at all the products that are available in the marketplace. Let's look at the positive and negatives of each product. And that's what's defined in this chart. So it gives the designer multiple opportunities to look at more effective materials that are going to deal with very site-specific situations. Then we looked at maximum minimum depths of sewers. So this is a struggle with some of the local municipalities in the region, whereas they start getting deeper sewers, they start noticing a lot more loading and pressure on their fittings and service connections that are causing them to have cracks and breaks. So we're looking at ways to maximize and minimize the sewer depth so that we're installing sewers that are not going to give us issues as we go forward. Then looking at how we're going to deal with service connections to the main line. Typically, they're just showed on the drawings. So a couple slides down, we have a little bit more detail for the designer to look at incorporating some more specific design details on how to get those laterals to where they need to go. Because right now, we've been on multiple sites, I can say over 50 sites over the course of the last 18 months. Pretty well, these are all field fit. The angles vary based on the construction methodology. Some are greater than 45, some are less than 45. And the OPS basically just really looks at what happens between either above or below 45, mostly just around the 45. So we looked at, we need to have more effective service connection details, and that's what we added to our standard. One of the things the contractors are really harping on and really looking for is more consistent bedding to reduce loading on pipe. They find no matter where they go in the municipality, they're getting different loading. Different loading is causing different results when they do their mandrel testing or when they do their air pressure testing. So we wanted to put some specifications in the standard that empower the geotechnical consultant working with the developer or the contractor or the builder to really look at the type of pipe that's going to be used on this project and whether or not the bedding requirements of the municipality are going to suffice for the material that's going to be used. And then on capital projects, we noticed that a lot of capital projects, we tend to put a substantial amount of trench plugs, really not seen too often in the development side. So we want to implement a bit of a standard on trench plugs so that we're minimizing the flow of water through the trenches that are typically free draining gravels. how do we get that water stopped so it's not getting in and through our system. It's a little bit of a quick snapshot. We looked at some different stuff for flexible pipe and rigid pipe, just some pictures of some different materials. Obviously that's a storm. The bottom picture has a picture of a storm sewer right beside a sanitary sewer. Some of the job sites we've seen typically have this. So we got to make sure that both, if the storm sewer has gaskets that may not be holding properly, we need to make sure that our system's working. And the last picture is a concrete pipe. And we've been working with Enrico's group to look at how we can deal with resilient connectors on concrete pipe to concrete manholes, and how we can deal with better waterproofing that area to make sure that it definitely doesn't give us problems moving in the future. Not today when the groundwater replenishes, or when we have, say, issues with the groundwater or in the groundwater table, but in the future years when the parging might come apart, or when things like that tend to happen, it reduces maintenance costs. So a couple dollars spent more looking at resilient connectors and the way we waterproof now might be substantial cost reduction for maintenance in the future. So things like that we're looking at. So when we're talking about maintenance holes, this has become a bit of a concern. There's quite a few maintenance holes. So we're looking at some different things in the standard that we've proposed at the 90% stage. We're looking at increasing spacing on certain manhole runs. So if you're having a larger diameter transmission main, typically in the municipalities development standards, it doesn't really change too often. They typically keep the same spacing. Whereas you look at, say, a regional trunk type system or type methodology, we tend to see different spacing, increased spacing when we get to larger. So we looked at CCTV capacities, we looked at flushing capacities to develop what could be the maximum minimum spacing that could be used, that we can maybe minimize or reduce a percentage of manholes that we're still seeing a substantial I&I, and not to be detrimental to the maintenance costs in the future. So that's what we're looking at. It wasn't just an idea. We called multiple CCTV companies and multiple flushing companies to see what their maximum minimum capacities are. Everyone's pretty well in the 3 to 350 range meters. So we looked at ways to change the maximum spacing so that we're within the available technology, but maybe we limit a few of the maintenance holes. Then the connection details, like I said, we want to eliminate connection details, eliminate I&I by increasing the specifications for connection details, putting in water stops, waterproofing, trying to eliminate I&I at one of the most critical spots, the connection between the pipe and the maintenance hole. Another thing that, back onto the maintenance hole. So originally we talked about going back to the Bentley versus the Mustang. We originally had a plan to waterproof all maintenance holes in the subdivision. Then we vetted that through our, like I said, almost 100 people, industry professionals. And what came back is that we need to do what's prudent and what the data is showing us. So what we did is we developed a bit of a flow chart. This is only a small page of the flow chart, just a snapshot of what it looks like. There's multiple pages to this where we walk the designer through the choice of whether or not a manhole structure needs to be waterproof based on its location, the hydrogeological information, its risk of I&I. So it gives a little bit of a relief to the system where we're not waterproofing every single manhole that may not be the key contributor to I&I, and that way we can focus our attention and funds to elements that are generally causing substantial I&I in our system. Then we looked at adjustment rings, which has been a very hot topic over the last, I'm going to say, 5 or 6 years. So we're trying to eliminate adjustment rings altogether, but we know it's very difficult. So what we're looking at is eliminating all adjustment rings until the subgrade. So when you get to or to base asphalt level, so until base asphalt level, the typical having it open or not paving the road or not access to the road is typically not really that critical. Public doesn't have access to the road, so leaving it open a little bit further so we can put in cast and placed adjustments or products that are available through the concrete pipe manufacturers that allow us to get to the grade, reduce all these maintenance holes, or sorry, adjustment rings. We've been on sites where we've seen upwards of 5 or 6, sometimes even 10 10 adjustment rings. 10 adjustment rings is pretty well another riser piece. So people are using a riser, a modulock to replace riser pieces, and 5 or 6 years down the road, we're seeing substantial I&I coming through that. So we need to reduce that. There's products in the marketplace that we'll discuss a little bit further that can deal with that, but that's where we go with that. And then finally, we dealt with specific waterproofing details, how we provide waterproofing on maintenance holes, protection boards. We've noticed on multiple sites, we did some trials that if we don't have a substantial amount of protection board, we tend to lose the effectiveness of the waterproofing. So we've worked hard to put together some sort of a detail to allow for a protection board. And you'll see in some of the images moving forward here. So we had some protection board. So we looked at some different things, whether we do a pliable type protection board, like a, I'm going to say like a mirror drain, something they would use on house foundations, or something that, or sometimes even 300 millimeters of sand before we backfill. We need something to ensure that the angular gravel that's being placed against the maintenance hole and the waterproofing is not puncturing the waterproofing or causing detriment to the waterproofing membrane and not allowing it to function properly. So these are some of the standards we're looking at. You see by some of the pictures. So back to the modulock, we spent a lot of time and effort on the modulock, looking at different things. So on the bottom left here, you'll see a picture of how typically modulocks are used to raise the grade to top asphalt. So typically they cut a whole square, they cut the asphalt typically in a square. I'd say probably 2 meters by 2 meters, if not more. We cut that down, they put the modulock, reset the frame and cover, and then we pave that. So typically we pave that, sometimes with tops, sometimes with base, but it's never the same. We always have that cold joint. So we looked at technologies in the marketplace that are available. We looked at, say, the DCast has the IFC product. We've looked at some of the other competitors to that. And we looked at how we can implement that into the standard and see if there can be used in new developments to reduce this type of differential settlement and sources of I&I. So as this settles, obviously it puts strain on the modulock, and we start to continually see I&I when we CCTV the manholes 5 or 10 years later when we're doing our inspections. So we need to look at new technologies that are in the marketplace that are available. So that's what I'm putting in here. You can see we spent a little bit of time on some sites trying to see whether or not the IFC type system really works. We spent 4 or 5 days on different sites trying to see if that or the Bibby product or any of the competing products actually work and how they work. So we've seen some great success with that. So we've implemented that into the standard to say that municipalities should start looking at different alternatives to reduce grade rings.
Not to interrupt, Joe, but
yes,
you're just a few minutes
behind. Okay, I'll speed it up a little bit. So then finally, we looked at laterals. So the biggest issue with the region is that a lot of local municipalities really didn't have very specific lateral design methodologies. And we looked at spots like, say, Durham. Durham has 3 or 4 different lateral connection details that walk you through what happens if your lateral is greater or less than 45 degrees. How do we deal with that? So we have that so that through this flow chart, it allows a designer to pick and choose the right standard and points to the standard they need to point to specify in their drawings of what they're looking for. And this is what typically it looks like. So we have a type 1 and a type 2 for different angles, one with a sweep, one without a sweep on regular, say 45-degree installations. And then we have situations where we have a riser piece. So we have some alternatives. We have controlled settlement joints and non-controlled settlement joints. So some different options we gave to contractors to reduce the loading on the fittings. But the main thing here is we're trying to keep whatever we do, trying to keep the fittings at the 1 or 2 o'clock. We're trying to maximize the flow in the sanitary sewer, so you don't need to upsize it. If we go to, say, a 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock position, we start to see reduction in the capacity of the sewer. So we're trying to keep it so that we're maximizing the sewer capacity, but dealing with the loading. So we're looking at testing. So testing, we're looking at more stringent CCTV testing. We're looking at whether or not testing of CCTV from the property line to the building face actually provides us information that we need to ensure I&I is being reduced. So we found that air pressure testing is a lot more effective for that, unless if you have groundwater issues and the site's being dewatered, it's very difficult with just CCTV to notice whether or not your joints are holding. So in the building code, part 7 allows for laterals to be air pressure tested. Like I said, 35 kPa for 15 minutes. There's really no design methodology or specification, just says it need to be tested. So we're trying to work with, or we developed a standard to try to deal with that with our OBC partners. And then finally, we're looking at reducing some of the mandrel test effectiveness. So typically the industry goes with, say, 7.5% deflection. We're looking at working with the geotechs to reduce the mandrel testing requirements to 5%. So we get a little bit less deflection on the pipe, which will hopefully reduce the deflection on the joints and reduce infiltration coming in for many joints. And then lastly, we added some new and specific technologies to maintenance hole testing that's going to allow us to do infiltration and exfiltration testing on all maintenance holes. So I'll show you some quick images of this. This is our little picture on the far right is something we played with on a couple sites in King. So we took the TY, and that one has a branch on it, but since then we've taken the branch out. So there's no longer a branch and it's no longer gasketed. We have a screw-on cap. So what we do is, if you can see on the far left, the concrete and drain contractor would then use that TY to put the bladder in, inflate the bladder. That'll allow us to test that one joint. And then once we test that one joint, they would have a cap or put another bladder in the clean out inside the building foundation or inside the building. So allow us to check the lateral, all the joints on lateral. Another thing we've done is we've replaced the test fitting with the reducer fitting, something that we found major inconsistencies in the marketplace. Some municipalities have a 5-inch branch, some have a 6-inch branch, but then the concrete and drain guy doesn't know really if it's what size it is. So we're trying to eliminate that. We're having the sewer and water main contractor install the actual reduce it to 4-inch pipe, put a 4-inch cap so that we have more consistency moving forward. And finally, I'm just going to skim through some new inspection standards. What we did is we took a standardized inspection reports that we typically see on York Region capital delivery projects. We amended them slightly, and then we're going to use this moving forward so that the developer's consultant has a guideline or checklist on how they can do proper inspection and daily reports that can be handed to the municipality and tied to release of LCs and final assumption. So last slide, I think we got to the end here, is flow monitoring. So the current issue with flow monitoring is that we need to standardize the technology a little bit. We need to standardize the reporting. Currently, we're using a rate-to-rate relationship, like a rational method, where we're looking at how effective that is on sanitary sewers. Is it effective? Is it actually helping us build watertight systems? Is it actually telling us whether the system is watertight? So we need to figure out how we can deal with that, and that's what we're working on right now. Then we want to work on standardizing the methodology so the data that is being generated is more consistent. So when it gets to the region, it's not pushed around, and the region can easily look through the data, move forward with it, so the developer gets answers quicker. We can deal with seasonal considerations. We can deal with not having the same issues for different size of developments. So we're not looking at based on hectares. We're looking at, are there ways that we can use a development, the size of development or the percentage of occupancy to tie it to the flow monitoring, so we're getting more consistent data. That's maybe not going to skew the numbers slightly, so we're not getting the right types of data we're looking for. And then finally, the last thing we're doing is we want to standardize the allowances and thresholds for all new developments. So regardless of where you are or what developer you're working for, the thresholds that will be assumed in your flow monitoring will be consistent throughout the region. So we have a consistent understanding whether or not the elements we're putting forward in this standard are actually giving us the type of I&I reduction that we're looking for. So next steps, just the last 2 slides here. Next steps is we're going to finalize and release our 100% submission. We're going to adopt and implement, and we're going to adopt the standard and deliver an implementation plan on how this will be rolled out. Then finally, once we get all that, the new standard will be rolled out. And then the region currently is working on revising their SIP, which is their allocation program. So we're working with the region on how do we deal with SIP and how SIP can work with this new program, and how once we roll out this program, will SIP still exist? Will SIP not still exist? Or how do we deal with the two working together? And that's all we have. We tried to get through this really quickly so we can leave more than half an hour for our for questions and comments. But I just want to acknowledge all 9 locals, the build group, the home builders, OCPA, Sewer and Water Main Association, Concrete and Drain, the precast guys, consulting engineers, the guys from SCS have been really helpful, NAPCO and IPEX. The Plumbing Advisory Committee, which was great. They worked for the chief building officials. They were very, very helpful in moving through the building code issues and how to deal with that. Then we dealt with some different groups, gave us access to their sites. Armland, Fieldgate, DG Group gave us access to their sites, and Condrain and TAC were just to name a few. CDC and a couple other, North Rock gave us access to their new developments so we could take pictures and see exactly what's going on in new developments. So thank you to all that group. So I think that's all we have. I tried to go a little quick here, so hopefully the questions are not crazy and mean, but I want to leave more time for questions. So maybe Amin, I'll pass it over to you. I'll stop sharing, and then maybe we can start with some of the questions and talk to the panelists.
All right. So I'll start with a question for you, Joe. And there's a few questions on the presentations, and then we can move to the panel discussion. So one question says, are you experiencing more I&I on PVC pipes versus concrete pipe, or vice versa, or what do you think?
We didn't really look at a product specific basis, but what we looked at is we're still seeing some I&I, whether it's on PVC or not, or concrete. I think it's more to do with the product that's selected, or the type of PVC or the type of concrete that's selected for the type of application. I think that's what we struggled with, is that there's not enough geotech or hydrogeological information that goes into the selection of the pipe. So sometimes we're seeing leaking in PVC pipe where maybe it's not the right PVC pipe for the application, and vice versa with the concrete pipe. So I wouldn't say one is more than the other. It's just based on the application.
All right. Thanks, Joe. The next question is for you, Ronin. Are you using 25-year RDII for your infiltration threshold?
We use the 25 years design storm that we're using for the region. And
the next question, I guess from the same person, is the 40 MLD reduction measured at the WWTP?
No, and that's why when we got the condition back in 2010, the ministry had asked us to reduce 10% in peak reduction at Duffin Creek. But because of the attenuation in the system, we had to submit through the strategy, which the ministry had accepted, is that volumetric reduction in order for us to be able to capture that what's happening in the collection system. So we're not measuring it at the Duffin Creek, we're measuring as we see it in the collection system.
Thank you. And Joe, you mentioned in your presentation some important concerns to keep an eye on regarding I&I. So the question is, in terms of hierarchy, or most important to least important, what is the summary of I&I concerns?
In terms of the elements that are causing I&I or generating I&I?
I guess so.
Yeah, okay. So what we looked at when we looked at our program and how the program works is that, I know when Ronin presented the data to us 18 months ago, when we looked at groundwater effect on the sewers versus, say, RDII, we started to realize that there's a lot of elements underground that we can't get to in the future. Things that are being installed in a new subdivision that maybe can be dealt with a little bit better, so that we're reducing that type of groundwater I&I that's persistent. So I think that's a bit of an issue there, is that, so mainline connections and mainline products things that are 7 feet, 8 feet, 10 feet deep, 20 feet deep. We need to really focus on those. Obviously, maintenance holes that are susceptible to flow or RDII, we need to look at that. And then the private side, we need to look at strategies to ensure that the pipe that's being installed on the private side is effective, the gaskets are working or the joints are working, so that's where we implemented the air pressure testing there. So that's sort of like top to bottom. I think those are the three elements that are key moving forward.
Thank you. I guess for time purposes, we'll just move ahead with the panel discussion, and we'll basically include some of the questions from the presentations when there is time. And just to let everyone know, keep posting your questions. If we didn't get time to answer them, we will forward them to the presenters and the panelists, and they should get back to you with an email. So our first question for the panelists is for Rosa D'Amico. How has the collaboration effort with the local municipalities and industry proven to be valuable for the region during this process?
Okay. I want to start by thanking our local municipalities and industry partners for their engagement and commitment to this work. Thank you, Dan, Amin, and MEA for having us today. As Renine mentioned earlier, wastewater servicing within York Region is a multi-jurisdictional, which requires a high level of collaboration. In 2011, the region collaborated with its 9 local municipalities to develop an I&I reduction strategy, and it also released a guideline for sanitary sewer inspection, which Renine mentioned in her presentation. Through the work in 2011 on the guideline, there were a lot of lessons learned, and one key lesson was collaboration, not only with our local municipalities, but with the industry, and that would be vital to the successful implementation of a new standard. If we fast forward to the start of this project in 2017, we needed to understand the issues from all sides of the table to collectively find solutions that would be implementable and sustainable. Together with our local municipalities and industry partners, we looked at construction practices, products and materials, work sign-off, design, testing and inspection practices, site plans, subdivision agreements, I&I design allowances, existing provincial guidelines, and also the OBC. To get us to the point we were at, we had to diligently review, rework, and revise standards and specifications to find solutions in eliminating I&I and move forward with best practices. I am most inspired by the way in which our partners have come together to create something innovative. In all my years as a public servant, this process has been the most organic and has provided us with such valuable insight to affect actual change. The work we are doing here, especially on updating flow monitoring requirements for our developer pilot projects and our servicing incentive program, once fully implemented, will become a performance-based standard and not prescriptive. Our goal was to set out and develop a region-wide industry standard and specification in both the public and private right-of-ways that is consistent and achievable throughout the region. And I think that we can collectively say we have successfully come together to achieve that goal. I'm excited to see what lies ahead, and once fully implemented across the region and our 9 local municipalities, we will assess potential reductions in I&I. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosa. So what I'll do is I'll take a question from regarding the presentation, and then I'll go back with another question to the panelists, just to keep ahead with the high demand of questions. So I guess this question can be directed to either you or Renine or you, Joe, whichever feels more comfortable in answering. What can be the reason for high GWI? Is this a relationship between high occupancy and GWI, groundwater inflow?
I guess I can answer that.
Go ahead, Renine. Yeah.
Yeah, so the way we analyze the groundwater infiltration is we do use an empirical method that is called the Stevens-Schutzbach equation, and it has what I presented today. It is not related to occupancy. It just gives us the percentage of the groundwater within the dry weather flow that we're presenting. So it won't impact it at this. But there are other ways that you would consider occupancy, and based on the water consumption rate. For this one that I presented today, it does not consider occupancy.
Thank you, Renee. So the next question to our panelists is to Stan. From the local municipalities' view, how will these standards help reduce the I&I in new developments? And to everyone, Stan is with the City of Vaughan.
Hey everyone, thank you for letting me be part of this panel. I mean, in 2011, the guideline was created by York Region to kind of assist municipalities mitigating inflow and infiltration issues. Although it proved to be a good starting point where municipalities started to specify some of those requirements, more work still needed to be done to assist municipalities with implementation of I&I reduction standards and testing procedures. The current document developed in collaboration with all stakeholders is more comprehensive, and it also provides more of a prescriptive approach, although it was mentioned that the goal is to move towards a goal-oriented approach further down the road. But it would allow municipalities and contractors to more easily follow, right? Information included in the document will assist both municipalities and contractors with implementation of I&I reduction strategies. It would also provide a framework for municipalities to develop uniform standards across all 9 municipalities within the York region. The common comment that we hear a lot in the field is that from contractors that there's no consistency in standards across municipalities. So this document is aimed to ensure consistent testing and construction requirements in the region, making it easier for municipalities to implement, but also for contractors to follow. We're positive that this change will yield improved quality of construction and testing, and therefore will have reduction of I&I down the road.
All right, thank you, Stan. The next question is for you, Joe. When you looked at pipe material options, did you look at how materials that offered longer pipe segments over other options as a way to basically reduce the number of joints? You are muted, Joe.
Oh, good question. Good question. So we actually did look at that. So we looked at different things. The problem that persists a little bit is that in the manufacturing process, or what the products, or ASTM or CSA, typically the sewer products or sewer materials are one type of diameter. So if we look at DR35 or SDR35, like they call it, and DR28 and DR26, those are sewer sizes. Then those are typically 4 meters long. Then when you get into the larger stuff, or sorry, the thicker materials like the DR18s and the DR25s and the DR26s, DR21s, that are typically either IPS or cast iron. They're typically 6 meters long. Sometimes they cause a different challenge because now all the fittings are different. No longer can you use the sanitary or sewer fittings on these pipes. They need to use cast iron fittings. It brings another thing. So we looked at the good and the bad. We looked at, say, the length of concrete pipe versus, say, concrete pressure pipe. And the flow chart that we made goes into a little bit deeper detail on some of these elements when we're looking at pipe selection. But we looked at the lengths, we looked at how to reduce some joints, but then we ran into some of the issues where as you get longer lengths, it changes the type of material, it changes the way the material interacts or gets used, the fittings you need. So we sort of weighed the good and the bad to make sure that we're choosing something that's constructible in the marketplace. Does that make sense?
Yeah, to me at least. Thanks for the concise answer. So our next question to the panelist is for Vince. Vince is the president at the Greater Toronto Sewer and Water Main Construction Association, and he's the senior project manager at Condré Group. So Vince, discuss the construction elements of this standard that was developed. Can you comment on the level of constructability within the standards?
Hear me? Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, York Region and Accardi Schaefer's and everyone here today for inviting the GTS-WCA in taking part of this process and discussion today. Is one of our core objectives as the GTS-WCA to find ways to improve our industry Together as a partner with the municipalities and the regions, we want to work on improving the health and safety of our communities. We appreciate having the opportunity to provide feedback into this discussion, as we're intimately involved and aware of the constructability challenges of the new specifications. So who better to ask these challenges than the ones who have to design it, build it, inspect it, and maintain this infrastructure. Involving the industry and its leaders at the outset in this process will go a long way towards creating a workable standard. We believe it is important to establish a clear standard and is universally adopted across York Region. It would improve our infrastructure and as it being built and maintain it easier in the future. We work across the province and we often find challenges in competing specifications that do not always jive. When we cross boundary roads from one municipality to another, we're often required to change how we are constructing our infrastructure and simply meet a different specification. The purpose of the infrastructure doesn't change, but the way we are building it does. And that always doesn't make sense. And therefore, establishing this universal standard across the region is so important. It would result in the best construction methods being applied to all underground infrastructure being built across the region. And in reviewing these standards and specifications, we took what worked and strived to make common sense based on sound engineering and construction practices. It's our goal during this process to make certain what appeared on paper works in the field. This one standard, one common goal, and one specification for York Region would be beneficial to our industry and to the municipalities who adopt it. It makes the construction of our industry more predictable. We gave an honest review to the new standards and specifications and what could and what cannot be changed and what cannot be constructed. We believe these standards and the specifications that we'll bring into the improvement of the constructability of your infrastructure, as they're based on best practices that we've seen across cities, towns, regions, and across the province. As a contractor, we always have a lot of issues every day and believe these specs will help fix some of the problems over the long term. As we always strive to improve our industry with new means and new methods, new products from our manufacturing and from our new technologies in our industry, we hope that this would increase good constructability at the end of the day. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Vince. So the next question, I guess, again, Joe or Raneen, whichever feels more comfortable and to take it. What is the main flow metering technology that you're already using for low flow I&I studies?
I guess I'll answer that, Joe. We currently use for our collection system what we call AV meter or area velocity meters. Sometimes, depending on the location, we do combine them with different kind of sensors or technologies, such as an ultrasonic sensor and flumes or weirs if need be, if it's a very low flow. Sometimes it's a combination or it could be, but most of our locations are AV meters. Now, keep in mind that the meters that we have installed are on existing system mostly, so occupancy is obviously at its maximum, so it's at full occupancy. For this particular standard for new development, we might be looking at, what are the best technologies that will, or combination of technologies that need to be used for lower flows.
Thanks, Renee. There's another quick question for you. Does that 40 MLD take into account low consumption, sinks, toilet, etc.?
Like I said, that 10% reduction for the goal, I guess the answer is, the question is about water conservation. So when like I mentioned before, when we did say what is
it seems that Renee is having some difficulties, so we'll move on.
Is the 10% reduction going to be?
We'll move on to the panelist discussion.
Yeah,
Renee, we'll go back to this question later.
No problem. No problem.
So the next question is for Enrico Stradiotto. Enrico is the Ontario Concrete Pipe Water Association, and at the president of Ontario Public Works Association. Enrico, in selecting the proper material for the application is key to success. How do these standards deal with that process, with the product selection that can be beneficial to the entire industry?
Yeah, okay, well, thanks for that question. And thank you for letting me be part of the panel. Certainly on behalf of the Ontario concrete pipe industry in Ontario, that we're glad to be part of this process. I think generally and most importantly, the standards gave an opportunity to consolidate material options and construction practices that firstly wanted and needed to meet the objectives of York Region. So that was key. But the standards also kind of still give the onus back on the engineer or designer to choose the most appropriate product. So I think that's important. In my line of work, we often use the line that there's a range of applications for every pipe, but there's not just one pipe that is suited for all applications. So that's kind of the reality of it. So, with these standards, when we look at designing sewers, we're trying to address, in my mind, two primary functions, which are to design that pipe as a structure and design that pipe as a conduit. So within the standards, there are design tables for the designer that address each of those requirements. You have a depth of bury table, which provides options in pipe selection that can guide the designer based on depth of application. And then on the other side with hydrostatic performance and based on groundwater table and pressures, there is again another table that gives guidance to the designer to select the materials appropriately. So that's all good and helpful. And something a little bit different in these standards, which you don't necessarily see in others, is the use of the design flow charts. I think that was a great option where there are sequence mapping and prompts that guides the designer to choose and make decisions, again, based on appropriate pipe materials as well as construction practice. So, some very good guidelines built within these standards. At the end of the day, I have to commend York Region for getting all the stakeholders involved in, designing, building sewers to be involved in this process of developing these new standards. For us as an industry, it gave us an opportunity to sit in, to understand what the issues were, what the concerns were, and not only of York Region, but all the stakeholders, developers, consultants, contractors. And then at the end of the day, as being part of that process, we had an opportunity to contribute viable solutions. I guess my worry would be if we had not been part of that process, the concern is that you might be developing new standards that are not practical by industry. And so now you actually have a bigger problem than what you started out to solve with initially. So I just, again, commending York Region and Accardi Schaefer's, their approach in trying to develop these new standards.
Thank you, Enrico. I see one of the audience has their hand up. Gustavo Jaco. You can unmute yourself now and go ahead and ask your question.
Sorry, I might have pressed that by mistake, but a question I had was if some water main grade pipe and other type of materials were considered for very highly localized areas of I&I.
Joe, you are muted.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Gustavo. Good question. We did. We considered all products. So we looked at PVC water main. We looked at concrete pressure pipe. We looked at nitrile gaskets for areas that are going to might have issues with contaminated groundwater. So we looked at all that. That's all in the standards. So it helps the designer, as Enrico discussed just recently, go through the flow charts to exactly figure out what type of product best suits the application they have at hand. It's very site specific. based on the data that you get generated in your reporting structure, in your developments of what the geotech provides you and what type of information you have, so that you use that to facilitate the design. So we did that. We looked at, like I said, all the products, where we looked at how those products can work. If we're starting to use PVC water main pipe, how do we deal with the fittings? When we start putting laterals, now we're using water main fittings, not sewer fittings. How does that affect our system? Is that going to be detrimental? So we looked at all those things, and reinforced and concrete pipe and concrete pressure pipe, and how do we deal with lateral connections and concrete pressure pipe 5 years from now or 10 years from now? Is the benefit of using it in certain situations worth the reward of what's going to happen 5 years from now? So we looked at all those things when we put together our flow chart.
Thanks, Joe. The next question, I guess, for the panelists, perhaps my guessing, Rosa would be the best person to answer. How is the best another GTA regional municipality can go about using this program developed by York Region? Given your experience, would it be possible to follow a faster process, and what is the minimum collaboration required in your thoughts?
It's a loaded question. I think you can definitely take what we've created, look at the concerns we've had and how we've utilized the various industry partners and our local municipalities, and try to make it applicable to your local municipality or your region. I think we're all dealing with similar problems and concerns and issues. Unfortunately, I don't think there's a fast track way to get to this end goal. Renine mentioned, and Joe and I reiterated, we started this in 2017. Definitely the pandemic has slowed down the collaboration and engagement process, but we've had to make do and make alterations to that. But it is a long process because we want to make sure that everyone at the table is aware. We're discussing the concerns, the issues from every side of the table, and then we're collaboratively coming up with solutions that work for all of us. There is some negotiation that needs to take place, and obviously there is some things that as a government we need to make sure we adhere to, and everyone has their own piece that they need to understand. But I don't think there's really a fast track way to get to where we have been. But definitely, I think what we've come up with and the work we've done can be utilized by other ministries, other regional municipalities and locals to, as lessons learned and move forward with.
Thank you, Rosa. So let's get back to that question that was asked for Renine. If I can find that.
I guess it was about the water conservation. I'm gonna.
Yes. So it says, does the 40 million liter per day take into account low consumptions such as sinks, toilets, etc.?
No, but the 10%, like I was gonna say, the mandate for the whole reduction that we needed to get is a 75 MLD, which the 35 MLD part of that does capture the water conservation. 40 is purely from I&I.
All right, thanks. So the next question is for Blair. Blair is the member at Build, and it's the principal at SCS Consulting. Blair, inspection and testing is key to successfully reducing I&I in new development. Can you discuss some of the key highlights in the standard that provide guidance and consistency to the industry on inspection and on testing requirements?
Yes, and thank you for having us here today. Certainly appreciate the opportunity. Developing and working on this program has been a cooperative effort, and Build appreciates the opportunity to be involved in the strategic development of this new standard. This new standard will assist the land development process by streamlining some construction details and inspection standards across the region. When implemented and adopted by all 9 municipalities, we will see greater efficiencies in both the construction of the work and the testing required. Over time, we anticipate seeing improvement in the workmanship, as a larger percentage of the sanitary sewer will now be constructed using the same methods invariably across the region. From the inspector and certifier's perspective, there will no longer be varying and inconsistent or informal testing requirements across the region. Same testing methods will be implemented in all 9 municipalities. Testing will be more routine, and costs and schedules will be somewhat improved because of this standardization. From the record keeping and documentation perspective, Joe showed some of the charts in his presentation. The standardized reports and requirements for taking the prescribed amount of photos are well identified in the current version of the standard. Some further refinement is needed. I think we've got to pare them down still a little bit, but the layout and the reporting requirement for construction of the sanitary system will eliminate any ambiguity on what is required of the inspector. The first version of the standard is a work in progress, and BUILD looks forward to be an active participant in the evolution going forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Blair. I see that now we're at 2:30, but we still have participants on. I will just put a poll on if you don't mind this session going a little longer, since there's so much questions going on and so much interaction. We can continue for a bit. And is the panel and presenters okay with that?
Yeah, I mean, one of my comments, maybe Rosa, Rosa working for the region could maybe give a little, shed some light on how the regional municipality of York works, that maybe there's some people on this webinar don't understand the intricacies between the tier system at the region. So maybe, Rosa, maybe it's better if you can describe like how the 9 locals work with us versus, you know, who owns the sanitary sewers inside the development. So, because maybe, I think we talked a little bit about all these different ideas, but I don't think we really, there's understanding maybe by the whole webinar and how it works at the region. So, Rosa, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I think Renee touched
also,
on.
we have consensus on. Yeah, we can go on a little longer. So go ahead, Rosa.
Yeah, so I think Renee touched on it in her slides. As the region is multi-jurisdictional for wastewater servicing and water as well. So the regional government of York, we supply water to our local municipalities, the 9. We also work with them to collect wastewater through our pumping stations and our wastewater treatment plants. So the way that it works with our locals is our locals are our direct customer and the residents are their direct customer. So in that relationship, there is a multi-tiered facet to this work. So we have to make sure that what we're looking at with the standards are applicable to our locals, because they are dealing with the residents and dealing with the construction of their subdivisions and with their contractors as well as developers, as well as the region with looking at the overall program, which is the I&I reduction strategy that we have as a condition of approval for the Southeast Collector. So when we say it's multi-jurisdictional, it's multifaceted, high level of collaboration, it definitely is that. There would be no way for us to dictate or provide reductions without that level of collaboration and work and engagement with our local municipalities. So there is a lot of coming to the table and negotiating on various options and the work that we're doing here. So I think, Joe, that's great that you brought that up. I don't know, Renine, if there's anything you wanted to add to that.
Well, I think you've captured everything, Rosa. If I would add anything, is that it is something we consider when we looked at the I&I contributors and, you know, which part of the jurisdiction is the most I&I is coming from. Is it a private side, the collection system, or regional system? But it's definitely something we've looked at. I think you covered everything.
Thank you. And since we're still talking about York region specifically, does York region own the local sanitary sewers or only the trunk sewers?
Only the trunk sewers.
So another question is, and also for the panelists, if you would like to weigh in after anyone takes the question to answer, feel free to do so. what is the local municipalities' take regarding making changes to their design and construction standards?
I don't know, maybe Stan can talk a little bit about that. He represents the locals. We met with the locals, I'm going to say 3 or 4 times with each local municipality. So we vented all these standard changes through every single local, but maybe Stan can talk a little bit about that because he's at the local municipalities. Stan, are you okay with that?
Yeah, no, 100%. So, I mean, as a local municipality, we're actually looking for direction from York Region, to ensure there's a consistent approach across all municipalities. And that's based on comments from both development community, contractors, and even from our perspective, it makes inspection much easier, inspecting that infrastructure, because the contractors are familiar with processes, and you don't have to go from place to place and constantly adjust. We already started including some of the requirements that were identified in 2011 guideline and our subdivision agreements, and started to specify those requirements, but we haven't really been proactively applying them in the field. And I think with implementation of launch of this standard, we're going to be further adjusting our standards to align them with this criteria, which will in turn help us, to be able to apply those requirements in the field more proactively and consistently.
I think it's important to add to that too, that part of this exercise for us was taking a look at all of the standards from all the various municipalities in York Region, and sort of looking for those best in class standards that each one of the individuals may have had, and combining all of that information into this New York Region standard. And I think that allowed the locals to have more buy-in, that we really were putting together the hybrid model that was made out of all of the best in class standards.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point.
Thank you, Blair and Stan. The next question is directed for Raneen. How is your region determining what is the root cause of the RDII? And once it's identified in the sewer system, what are the targeted remediation techniques?
For people who work with us closely, they know flow monitoring is a big thing that we're going after, and that's how we started, like I said, the first year of implementation with installing meters throughout the region. So data is telling us everything. And the more data you collect, the more you'll be able to understand what's happening. We did divide the region to different, what we call catch basins or audit basins. And through those, we would be monitoring. After the monitoring, we do break it down to further monitoring, which is on the mini basin level. And from that, we do our own analysis and then go ahead and do some investigative work, such as what we call SSES or sanitary sewer evaluation studies through either CCTV or visual inspection, as well as smoke and dye testing.
And once that's done, what do you think, what are the targeted remediation techniques that you are using to resolve?
There's different technologies out there, and we've piloted a few. There are obviously different technologies that you would use on what you find on the public side versus the private side. On the public, you do pipelining or CIPP, and we tried those. On the public side, you can be looking at downspout disconnection, sump pump disconnection, even foundation drains, and we're even looking at third pipes sometimes with our foundation drain connections that could be, or any cross connection through the storm sewers. That answers the question, but
yes, thank you, Ronnie. Another question. Is there a cost share program in place between locals and region for working on extraneous flows reduction?
Maybe I'll direct that to roles that you might have, but currently we don't. I think when we initially developed the strategy, we were looking at cost sharing, but currently there isn't one. It's something we probably may be aiming for. However, it's not easy when you're not marking the wastewater on the boundary level. But maybe I'll ask Rosa to add if she has anything else to add to that.
Yeah, good question. We're not cost sharing. What we're doing right now is for our I&I reduction program, the flow monitoring program is fully funded and controlled or administered by the region. So regional staff administer the program. We work collaboratively with our locals on designing and picking areas of flow monitoring and the audit basins and the mini catchment areas that Renine had mentioned. And then we work with our local municipalities, and they then do the large or medium remediation work on their sewers and their catchment areas. We are working on various pilot programs where we're jointly working with our local municipalities and performing work in their systems. And the region is cost sharing that work. But currently right now, we don't have a fully robust cost sharing model or looking at that at this time.
Thanks, Rosa, and thanks, Renine. The next question is,
one second. I saw one question as I'm perusing through here. Something
go ahead.
When we talked about manholes and frame and covers, I noticed someone asked a question about pick holes and how do we deal with pick holes. So I just wanted to add on top of that, we've initiated a discussion with a lot of the frame and cover manufacturers across Ontario that provide the frame and covers to pretty well all sites. And we're looking at using a way to come up with a single type pick hole type frame and cover so that it can eliminate some of the discussion that we're having with I&I and the pick holes. So I know we've tried everything. We've tried plugging the pick holes, bolted down frame and covers. So now we're looking at some different opportunities to look at materials or new technologies that are available in the marketplace to maybe reduce the pick holes to one pick hole. We looked at operations. We talked to some of the contractors. They can deal with one pick hole. So we're looking at technologies that might present itself in the 100% standard that gives municipalities an opportunity to start using some of these like single hole or single pick hole manhole frame and covers. So I just wanted to let you know, see that. I saw that as a question, but it's something that we looked at because sometimes the region tends to struggle with theoretical or realistic I&I coming through the pick holes. So we need to figure out how we can deal with that moving forward.
Thanks, Joe. The next question, I guess for our municipal folks here. Since the panel is very diverse, feel free to weigh in with your opinion. How do you approach the remedial works on the private side?
Probably could answer that. We just recently did a pilot project in 2 study areas. Again, being an upper tier municipality, it's not an easy task because we have to deal with multiple jurisdictions to get to the private side. But the model that we developed did address that. We try to pinpoint the areas as much as possible before we go. So if you try to limit the area that you're trying to do communication, I think that would be a key issue at the beginning. And communication and education was a big thing. So we did develop a model where we would communicate and with the residents ahead of time. Then we would do the investigation. We gave them the opportunity to weigh in terms of we do the inspections. If they allow us to go on the site, we identify the issue and then we offer incentives for them to hire a contractor to do the work on their property. We found that model could work. Unfortunately, we could not continue because of COVID, but that was a model that we consulted with our legal and risk as well. Just being a local, and regional municipality is something that we also needed to ensure it's taken care of. So we think that model works. We're still learning, but that would be one thing is through incentives. We were offering 100% incentives.
Thank you, Renine. Any weigh in from the panelists?
I think that's fine.
All right. So we'll move into the next question. from Dave Thompson. Since the success of the I&I reduction program may lead to possibility of more new development being able to be added to the system, from a municipal perspective, is there any of the project being funded by development charges? That's quite a political sensitive question. So.
Is this program? I don't know what the question is.
I guess if I understand the question correctly, maybe Rosa could weigh in. We do have, the ones I mentioned, the P3 initiatives, which are called developer-funded I&I. So in areas, we typically don't provide capacities for I&I reduction, and because it's a mandate that we do need to reduce it. However, we do have developer-funded projects, which we call the tri-party agreement. In areas that we have constrained capacities, that agreement would offer developers capacity in return for reducing I&I. And there is a ratio. We typically use a 2-to-1 ratio for those type of agreements. On the existing, on the new system, what we call the SIP program, which is the Servicing Incentive Program, that program offers an additional capacity, or maybe, I wouldn't say additional, but maybe advanced capacity for if they would apply for the SIP program, which offers more tighter requests for installations, like what we're trying to do through the standards, and it asks for a lower I&I rate of 0.12 liter per second per hectare.
Thank you, Renee. Another question. Yeah, feel free to add in or weigh in, Rosa, or any other from the panelists.
I think
all good.
Touched it, yeah.
All right. So the next question is, I guess we'll take one more after that, and we'll wrap it up. So when would the local municipalities expect the results in a final report, and will the final report be municipality specific?
So like I mentioned, we do prepare an annual report to the province. It goes as a one report, reporting on the reduction that's coming from the region and all 9 local municipalities. So in the background, we do have our own communication with each of the local municipalities on work they've completed. We help with the estimation on the reductions, and we all report it as a one report. If that
Thanks, Renee.
Yeah, I don't know, I mean, was the question regarding our reporting or this project specific?
I think based on how it's wording and the context, it's regarding this project specifically.
Okay.
Is there such a thing as a final report associated with this project? So
there will be the final design standards and specification. What we are planning to do is go to a regional council for adoption and endorsement at the end of 2021. And then we will have either a year to 2 years of rollout implementation, where our 9 local municipalities will be looking to implement the new standard and specification and work within their local municipal conduits to get this rolled out. So it will be about a 2-year process where we're going to see this all rolled out and implemented throughout the 9 and the region.
Thank you, Rosa and Renee. The last question I guess we'll take today is, can you expand on recommendations for private property I&I reduction in new development? What are the key elements or strategies to reduce these flows? Basically, I guess, best practices.
So
this question is for all the panelists. I think it's proper.
Yeah.
I can take a first shot at some of it. I mean, I think we've talked about this in the past, that we do have some issues when we cross over the private property boundary, that we're now dealing with OBC issues. And A lot of the standards that we've outlined in this document and a lot of the reporting practices, et cetera, bedding, pipe types, all those sorts of things need to be, I guess, proofed with the OBC so that we can start to utilize all those different methods once we cross the property line. And I think that's probably one of our future next steps.
Yeah. On the regular development side, where we basically work with the chief building officials and the plumbing inspectors to give them a little guidance on how we expect the air pressure test to be. So right now the OBC is prescriptive on or explains what they're looking for, but they're very not prescriptive on how to do it. So they tell the developer or whoever, the concrete and drain or the plumbing inspector, that there needs to be air pressure testing on the lateral, but there's really no prescriptive methodology on how to do it. So we took that a little bit on our own, and we circulated a prescriptive methodology that right now, based on what we've sent to the locals, all 9 locals are going to start adopting it, and we're going to start moving forward with that within the scope of the OBC. But on Blair's question, that's typically been a bit of a gray matter. Site developments and ICI type projects tend to be a bit of a struggle. A lot of them deal with some municipalities put it through development engineering and do that, and they have site plan agreements that allow the municipality to dictate some of the work that goes on the OBC side. But we don't have a consistent across the region, and something we got to deal with. But we're hopeful that some of the OBC group or some of the chief building official groups we've talked to are confident that there could be some mechanism within the bylaw agreements that they have that can help them enforce and implement some of these changes in the OBC side.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, I think that answers the question and wraps it up for our webinar today. I would like to thank everyone for attending and for sticking around overtime. This just testifies to the importance of the work that you guys are doing at York Region and the partner consultant and contractors. Thank you everyone for York Region and Accardi Schaeffers for sponsoring this webinar, and thank you to all our panelists for taking the time and sticking in after time to accommodate the question demands and all of that. This wraps it up for our webinar. The questions that were not answered, we will forward them to the panelists, and hopefully we'll get back to you with answers. As for the recording, we're still working on it, and once we get proper approvals and all of that, we will post it online. Thank you so much.
Thank you.